think you have control of the screen share. Can you scroll down just a little bit to the agenda portion? That'd be great. Thank you. So I'll do my best to kind of stick to timeline here. I'll kick things off. So first thing, my name is Brian Feldheim. I am a senior policy advisor here with the Division of Financial Regulation. This is going to be the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for Senate Bill 829 that just passed out of the 2025 session. And then around this today, as far as what we're going to be talking about is rulemaking that we'll be undertaking for a premium assistance program that's been funded by the legislature to help provide premium assistance to affordable housing, shelters, project turnkey sites, and navigation centers. So kind of with that, as far as to make sure everyone's in the right spot, we'll go ahead and do introductions. So again, Brian Feldheim of the Division of Financial Regulation. And I have quite a few folks here this morning. I'm just going to see if I have anyone else from staff. So it looks like it may just be Karen and I. So Karen, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I am Karen Winkle, the division's rule coordinator, and I am recording this meeting, and the recording will be available on our rulemaking website probably in a few days.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Appreciate it. And kind of just how Teams is showing folks as far as kind of in the room, as it were. So in no apparent order, I'll just kind of go down through the list so I don't miss anyone. So just first I have that's non-staff, Ryan Fisher.
Hello, my name's Ryan Fisher, he, him pronouns, and I represent the Housing Authorities of Oregon, which is the statewide association of public housing authorities.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And Richard Wheeler.
Yeah, I'm going to be the guy that's actually helping design and do the IT technical stuff for getting this project actually rolled out. So I'm just here to listen.
Great, thank you. And Kevin Cronin.
Hey everyone, Kevin Cronin, Policy and Advocacy Director with Housing Oregon. We represent CDCs and homeless service providers across Oregon. Thanks for letting me be in on this meeting. Appreciate it.
Certainly, thank you. And Karen Thessing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Thessing. I'm the Executive Director of HARP, also known as the Housing Authority Risk Retention Pool, and AHARP, the Affordable Housing Risk Retention Pool. We have risk retention groups in California, Washington, Oregon, and Nevada, and I am here to listen and learn. Thank you for the invite, Brian.
Thanks, Karen. And for everyone, if I butcher your last name, that is entirely on me. I have a very unique last name, so it's my, I guess, prerogative to mess up everyone else's name because mine gets messed up. All righty. Next, Patricia Akers.
Well, you nailed it with the last name. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patricia Akers. I use she, her pronouns. I am an operations and policy analyst with OHCS in the Affordable Rental Housing Division, and I'll be offering policy support as we move through this. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Michelle Drews.
Hi, I'm Michelle Drews. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Consumer League, and I'm also a consumer representative on the Insurance Advisory Committee. Thanks.
Thank you. And Sean Miller.
Hey, Brian. Sean Miller, the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. I know Denny Ritter can't be here, so I'm just kind of filling in, listening for her. So
great. Appreciate it. Thanks. And let's see here. All right. And then Danielle, is it Batista Silton?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Danielle Bautista Silton, use she, her pronouns, and I'm with Oregon Housing Community Services as an unhoused policy and planning analyst, working primarily on shelter policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, Jesse O'Brien.
Hi everyone, I'm Jesse O'Brien. I'm the manager of the policy section with the division and he, him pronouns.
Thanks, Jesse. And let's see, Kenton, Brian.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kenton Brine, he, him pronouns. I'm president of the Northwest Insurance Council. We're a trade association of property and casualty insurance companies. Glad to be with you.
Thanks, Kenton. All right. And then let's see here, showing John Carp, who goes off the screen. Sorry, John Carp Evans, maybe?
That's correct. Thanks. I'm John Carp Evans. I'm the Deputy Director at Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon.
Welcome. All right. And Cindy Dyer.
Hi all, I'm Cindy Dyer. I'm with Columbia Care Services, and we're a behavioral health specialist in the state of Oregon. We're also a affordable housing developer and provider, and Ben Solheim had asked me to sit in since he wasn't able to attend.
Great, thank you. And then Andrea, is it Meyer?
It's Myri.
Meyer, okay.
Yes, and I otherwise, which means swamp in Norwegian. So if you wanted to know that, I'm the executive director of Corvallis Housing First, and on several community advisory bodies for shelter and homelessness here in Benton County.
Great, thank you. And then join next, Ed Davis.
Okay, there's the mic on. All right. I'm Ed Davis. I'm the legislative chair for the Big I of Oregon, and I'm here primarily to kind of see to what extent that our association members might be impacted, or if there's any way that we can help in the process.
Great, thanks, Ed, appreciate it. All right, and then next up I show Tanisha Rosas. I said that wrong, sorry, Tanisha.
No, you did. You did good. Tanisha Rosas, Oregon Housing and Community Services. I'm on the government relations team. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. And then next I'm showing Sveta Ambati. I should know that better, but I don't. I'm sorry, Sveta.
That was really close. No worries. Sweta Ambati, she, her pronouns, Governor Kotek Senior Housing Advisor. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, and then a couple folks from DFR staff are also with us. So next I have Hunter McClure.
Yeah, Hunter McClure, he, him pronouns. I'm the policy project manager, just helping Brian move things along.
Thanks, Hunter. And John Hayworth.
Thank you, Brian. Again, it's John Hayworth. I'm licensing and retaliatory tax manager here at DFR. Thanks again.
Thanks. And then Tricia Goldsmith.
Good morning, Tricia Goldsmith. I'm the manager of our consumer advocacy unit here at the division.
Thanks, Tricia. And then last I'm showing in the room is Isis Thornton Saunders.
Hi, everyone. Isis Thornton Saunders here on behalf of Professional Insurance Agents of Oregon, otherwise known as PIAO. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Alrighty, so I just want to double check as far as if there's anyone I didn't call your name out, please, if you would just go ahead and introduce yourself. That's for everyone's benefit here today and also for the record as well. And then we do have a fairly full attendance this morning, so I'll try to do my best to stick to the agenda, but just want to make sure, was there anyone that I missed for introductions? All right, seeing no hands, no one coming on the mic, so that's always a good sign. So part of the meeting materials that was sent out, I think it was about a week and a half ago, Karen sent, was just a copy of today's agenda, and there was also a copy of the enrolled bill for Senate Bill 829. Right now, as far as I refrain from sending out any kind of like outline or draft language on rulemaking for this, I wanted to have this today kind of be a good listening session and kind of getting feedback from folks as far as on this topic. I sometimes find that if I start with draft rule language and hanging out there that folks kind of take that as oh, that's a given, that's what it's going to look and feel and sound like. So I wanted to try to avoid that and in the hopes of having an open conversation today about what this bill does. So kind of like I mentioned at the outset, there are several pieces within Senate Bill 829. This bill is designed to try to help alleviate certain aspects of insurance impacts around affordable housing, and it does some other different things as well. This rulemaking is going to be honed in on, I believe it's section 1 and 2 of the bill, has to do with a premium assistance program for affordable housing, shelters, project turnkey sites, and navigation centers. So that's all language that was inclusive in the bill itself. I don't want to necessarily belabor the bill language, but the components in the agenda were really kind of the heart of what we're going to be doing rulemaking around. So the agenda portion I'm looking at here is just the background portion for Senate Bill 829. The big pieces of the bill directs us at DFR, and we'll be seeking input from the RAC members, is how will eligibility be determined for this premium assistance program? And maybe let me back up real quick too. So a portion of Senate Bill 829 appropriated just under $2.5 million to be used to help pay down premiums for eligible entities. Again, that would be affordable housing providers, shelters, project turnkey sites, and navigation centers. So I'll just kind of refer to them as eligible entities because that's a mouthful to say otherwise. So with this, it's my understanding that there's, broadly speaking, everything is not just affordable housing. It's not just shelters, that there's nuance. And so that's what I'm hoping to kind of get back from the RAC here today and going forward is what does it mean? What is the difference between affordable housing and shelters and project turnkey sites and navigation centers? What are their unique needs? One of the other things too, as far as, so with just under $2.5 million to help with premium assistance, how should that money be kind of divided amongst those who need that kind of assistance? Is it just going to be a universal pot of money? Should there be a bifurcation of funds where there's definitive funding for affordable housing, there's definitive funding for shelters? Those are good discussions, I think, to have. Around this, so a little bit of background too. So DFR is a financial regulator for insurance companies, banks, financial institutions. We're kind of the de facto financial regulator for those types of entities here in Oregon. With Senate Bill 829 and standing up this premium assistance program, this is new territory for DFR. We don't have or have not had a kind of a public-facing assistance component within our agency. So this is, like I said, new territory for us. So again, getting feedback on how we can make this a workable program will be pretty key. So along that line, as far as what I want to kind of talk with the RAC as well, as far as how should we go about doing an application process for these funds? How can we make this, a least burdensome, but still having the necessary controls in place to appropriately determine who's eligible to receive funds? So I think we should talk about that a little bit. And then also just want to discuss a little bit around I had listed as far as how to make payment awards. I recognize, and I think most everyone here recognizes, that $2.5 million is not a lot of funding for the need that's out there. I'm pretty sure that we can all universally agree that insurance premiums have been climbing at a pretty good clip for the last several years, and that's reflective of several things kind of throughout the industry, throughout the country. So not really going to get into the hows and whys premiums are going up. This program is just another effort to try to help mitigate some of the premium burden on these entities, on these eligible entities. So along that line, as far as how should payments be awarded, is kind of what criteria should we be looking at as far as to make payments? As far as I would assume that there's probably greater need than there is funding, so there will be some tough choices to make as we move forward with this. And then kind of next on the agenda here was looking at how do we prioritize, what criteria should we be using as far as who receives funds and how much. And to that way, I'm thinking as far as it kind of gets into the nature of, should we be designating buckets of money for affordable housing, a separate bucket of money for shelter, or should it again be kind of one universal pot? We just have to weigh as far as how that should be prioritized. And then kind of within that thought process there, as far as allocation or even a wait list, as far as and this kind of gets a little bit back to the application process. So a little bit of, I would like to get feedback from folks and discuss is as we take in applications for this funding, do we want to look at as far as a true competitive kind of application process where there's an application window? then like a review time period, and then based on a review criteria, some kind of standards. I don't want it to sound insensitive, but like how would a winner and loser be determined from an application process? Because again, with the limited funding, as far as I do feel that there probably will be instances where we can't help everyone. And then kind of the last bit I think that's worthy of discussion and getting some more information on is how do we determine how this program is working? What are our metrics for success? And to determine, are these funds being used appropriately, and is it moving the needle as far as helping these entities that we know need some help? So I think that's kind of in a nutshell a good start on the background. Before I do anything else, does anyone have any questions, or does anyone kind of want to weigh on some of those pieces I raised? And I'll go just kind of as I see the hands come up. Ed, go ahead.
I would like to say first off that I don't really have an applicant in this fight that I'm thinking of, so I don't have any particular preferences as to where it goes. But I think we need to look at this in terms of saying let's identify as we can where the need is greatest, and not fall into the trap of trying to give a little bit to everybody, because then we'll end up kind of like if you see you're a potential claimant in a giant class action suit, and you may have the opportunity to gain $2.98. So let's be careful not to fight amongst ourselves in terms of that. I think Kenton and I are primarily interested in to what extent can the insurance industry help identify where the need is the greatest. I don't know what that is, and how we have access to the information at the consumer level as to who's having trouble finding insurance, who's having trouble paying for it, and what's the number and nature of the clients that they are serving.
You're on mute. Brian, you're on mute.
Sorry, that's what I get for trying to manage multiple things on a little tiny laptop screen. So hopefully we can hear me. Thank you very much. I think those are all very valid points, Ed. And then Cindy, I saw your hand go up here. Let's go ahead and go Cindy. And then I saw there was a comment from Ryan. We'll get Ryan's comment. We'll go Cindy first.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to take just a broad stroke without a lot of details, but I do agree with what Ed said. But I also wonder, and this is coming from the affordable housing standpoint, what about some alignment with the governor's housing goals? Meaning, like specifically, like there's a lot of effort going into creating permanent supportive housing, and I know that housing authorities and other developers, we've seen increases in insurance, but particularly when we're dealing with some of the most hard to house vulnerable populations. So I wonder if there's some alignment both from a standpoint of need and maybe making I'll use the term application process, whatever that may look like, align with some of what OHCS does around the affordable housing awards.
Great. Thank you. That's a good point of view. Appreciate that. And then Ryan had a question in the chat. So his question is, what is the timeline for getting the program set up? Also, what is the timeline for getting rules adopted? So right now, I'll kind of take that in reverse order. So right now, I think our initial goal, our aspirational goal here at DFR is to try to get rules adopted by December of this year. The bill passed, I believe, with an emergency clause attached to it. So that already moves it up as far as in kind of the imperative as far as getting rules in place. So the program itself coming out of Senate Bill 829 has some different moving pieces. We're hoping tentatively, and I want to stress this again, this is a tentative as far as we're trying to have the program like go live. So applications open, rules are in place, forms are set up sometime in April of 2026. The reason why that's a little ways out there is as I mentioned, a technical component, an IT component that we will have to stand up here at our agency as far as to do some kind of intake for the applications, some kind of like eligibility determination, and then ultimately using that to establish as far as eligible entities and to make those payments out to folks. So we currently do not have a system that does those components. So that's something that we're going to have to build out. Hopefully that I've been around enough IT development programs. I know that there's always a hiccup or three that can't always be anticipated. So right now, again, that is our intended timeline, is to have the program up and running, at least in the guise of taking in applications and beginning that review process in April. If we can do it sooner, that would be our preference, but trying to be pragmatic and realistic, I don't see that we would get it done sooner than that. But as this endeavor kind of moves forward, our IT folks, as we are able to scope that work more thoroughly and more incisively, that'll start to help them give us timelines as far as when we think we can have the tech component ready to go. So I hope that answers your questions there. That's kind of what we're shooting for. Right. One of the pieces, I think it's, oh, Ryan, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to check, Brian, and there was a meeting, in the last year, it was before the legislative session began, where housing providers spoke with some members of DCBS, and I know Jesse O'Brien was on that call because I know him and I recognized him. Were you on that call as well?
I probably was, but there was a couple of points in time where I was out of the office on vacation. And I know there was some activity, so it may have been during that time frame. If it was in kind of the August time frame, or was it earlier?
So. And I don't want to kind of repeat, and probably a lot of folks on this call already know this, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but I just want to make sure that the sort of the context for the need for this bill is raised early in this conversation, which is that right now, affordable housing providers, and I think shelters are also in this boat as well, are under an enormous amount of stress and financial stress. And in part, it's coming from the increase in insurance, but there are other operating costs that are also going up at rates that are far beyond what was anticipated when the housing was developed. And the reason why that's important is that unlike commercial housing or market rate housing, when you build affordable housing, you have to anticipate what your expenses are going to be for the next 60 years, really. But in particular, the next 20 to 30 years, because you're not going to be able to collect enough rent and you're not going to be able to raise your rents in order to meet changes in the operating costs. And so what we have right now are a lot of affordable housing properties that are on the brink of going into foreclosure or on a path toward being on the brink of going into foreclosure because their operating costs have gone up beyond what was anticipated when they were built, and they don't have any mechanism to deal with those shifts in the market, and the insurance is an important part of that. And the reason I want to kind of frame that at the beginning is because I think when you're trying to answer some of these questions that you laid out, and I think you have a great list of questions set up here, when it comes to prioritizing or figuring out, I think maybe it might be important to understand that there's this context of there are these properties that are at risk right now. And Kevin may remember these numbers a little bit more sharply than I do, but toward the end of session, we did some analysis. And I think over the last 30 years, we've had 2 properties in the state of Oregon that were affordable properties that have gone into foreclosure. Right now, over the next 2 years, we have something in the neighborhood of 35 properties that are at risk of going into foreclosure. And as we look further out, it gets worse. There are some folks who have been doing work in other areas about how to determine which properties are most at risk, but also some properties that maybe are beyond, maybe foreclosure is the best path at this point because, they're so far gone. And I don't know what those criteria are, but there are some people out there that have been doing that work, and that might be useful to this group. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of frame that idea of sort of why this bill was important and why affordable housing providers advocated so strongly in favor of it.
And Ryan, I really appreciate that's actually really just a great summary as far as kind of why are we here? Why are we doing this work? And so that's excellent. And I probably was not on that call as far as just on the time frame. So I'm glad to have you in the room as it were now, kind of sharing that perspective. I think that's going to be an important piece as we work on this rulemaking. And one of the other things too, kind of tie it back to what Ryan was saying, and some of what I was mentioning earlier, as far as that's largely what this rulemaking is going to have to do, as far as we're going to have to try to identify greatest need, and how are we going to tackle that. And so having that perspective too, as far as that is very much my takeaway and DFR's takeaway as far as this bill and others that were passed this session. As far as the goal is, how do we how do we mitigate the loss to affordable housing and shelter space? And then if we can, if it's doable, is there any way to toe the line or even possibly increase in those spaces? How potentially can this bill help with those goals? So again, it always comes down, it seems, to dollars and cents. So I'm looking at this almost as a triage mindset. How do we find the most bang for our buck to try to kind of reach those goals? And they're all kind of in tension with each other. One of the things I kind of wanted to discuss here too is it may seem kind of boring, but around the application process, I think there's going to be a lot that can be determined with that. And this will also kind of help with how quickly we can get something set up from a tech perspective. There's a wide range we can do. Is like if we want it super simple and maybe the fastest as far as we get it set up, we start taking applications, and it's the first to apply gets the first crack at the pot of money. But I don't know that that is kind of the best use. I would kind of been leaning towards we have an application period. It's a window. So all comers, making that application, and whatever criteria we think is a workable criteria as far as we need to determine several things. We need to determine that they're eligible, so that they're an affordable housing provider, a shelter site, turnkey site, a navigation center. We have to be able to determine that. We have to establish, as far as my hope is in the application, what is the need. And frankly, that's kind of a hard one for me to kind of figure out. We want to make sure that this is not like a multi-step 4-hour process where it's just not worth anyone's time to do it, or perceived as not being worth anyone's time. One of the other things that we'll need to do too, as far as with the application, is how do we establish how much is being preserved, as far as is giving help to one or a couple entities going to preserve hundreds or even thousands of units, whereas if we give to maybe a couple hundred recipients, we maybe only preserve a couple hundred of units of housing. So, there's a lot to try to gain from, or to try to understand from folks who need help from an application, and that's kind of difficult. I've worked in different capacities over the years, and recognize that the more we put on, like how do we establish who's who and what the need is, it's going to make for a more complex program, both administratively, for folks to make that application, then even from a tech side, as far as how do we roll this out and make decisions and try to make payments. So I'll pause there because I see a hand up. Kevin, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Ryan, so much for really doing a great job of summarizing issues. So hearing what you're saying, Brian, OHCS has published a framework to sort of help us identify some of these properties. And I think, it might be beneficial if we could align like eligibility criteria and things like that between the two groups.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And sorry, Kevin, were you still talking there? I couldn't tell if you.
I mean, I can share with you with the whole class, I guess, the framework that we have from from July 8th, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And one of the things too, and this is kind of for the group at large too. So the bill language does direct us at DFR to consult with folks at OHCS They have a broad and deep knowledge as far as, you know, who this constituency is, you know, what their needs are, kind of where they're at, and how we can hopefully kind of tap into that institutional knowledge, because we recognize we're financial regulators. We are not housing experts. And that's one of the things I want to make clear to everyone here is my goal is really to lean on the expertise of folks who know affordable housing, who know shelter spaces. It's kind of my job to you is to educate us as best you can as far as where these needs lie and how we can best try to meet these needs with limited resources. And Kevin, I see you pop that into the chat. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Andrea, go ahead.
I think in thinking about shelter and just some of the situations that we've seen here, also, I don't think that this should be a resource for communities where there's ridiculous insurance requirements put upon shelters by other funding entities. So like, for example, you know, having really high amounts for liability, things like that. I don't think that there's consistency with some of the insurance requirements for shelter, and it's communities can be really conservative to the point where like you can't even buy the type of insurance that they're asking for example. So trying to control for some of that or think about that would be a good thing to do as a part of this process.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's good insight. And Ed, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would, Andrea, it would be helpful to have a feel for who are the organizations that are making these requirements. Is it the insurance companies themselves, or is it some kind of a regulatory organization or a lender, or, you know, some other entity that's making the requirement?
It's the local, it's sometimes in our case, it's a local government that's providing, I mean, I don't know if this is really, I think this is related though, but like local government that's providing funding for shelter operations in addition to like the state funding that they would get. You know, so you have to provide insurance as requested, you know, by your funders, and some of the requests that they have for insurance are just not realistic.
Yeah, so they may be driven like a city attorney or a county council, or, you know, somebody who isn't paying attention to the other parts of the problem, but, you know, is looking at it from a very, okay, that's good. One of the things that I was thinking about as we talked about this is in any sales organization, you learn very quickly that if you don't take care of your current clients, they go out the back door faster than you can bring new clients in the front door. And so while you pat yourself on the back about all the new things you've done, you're not making any headway. And I think we need to be very careful, again, listening to what Ryan and Kevin had to say, that we don't get too focused on saying, well, we've got to bring in new projects somehow, and then watch all of the existing ones go out the back door. And Andre, I want you to know I'm a Swede, so we Norwegians, or we Scandinavians, got to stick together.
So to answer Ed's question and a follow up on Andrea, so for the buildings that we're talking about, the lenders and OHCS typically have similarly aligned insurance requirements, but the syndicated investors can have wildly different insurance requirements. So amongst our parties, that's kind of how it looks. Someone suggested maybe we should try to get those folks to align their requirements to make things work better, but that was just an offhand comment some time ago.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that. And Ed, go ahead.
One other thought is I'm thinking other boards I've been on, one of the things that people look at is, okay, like we were talking about, how do we determine the success of the program? What have we accomplished? And I think it's important for us to recognize and remind ourselves that 2.5 million is a drop in the bucket in terms of the scope of this overall problem. So it's really important that we recommend things that the division can do that will at least show demonstrable results. We spent the 2.5 million and this is what we accomplished. Otherwise, you'll just give people a lot of reasons to say, yeah, there was just another virtue signaling and we just spent $2.5 million for nothing.
Great, thanks, Ed. I think that's a very valid point there. And one of the things too, as far as, and I kind of mentioned it just in brief previously, was as we're looking at awards, as far as it's very limited funding as far as to make meaningful awards. How would folks feel around? I want to make sure that like it's not just a single entity absorbs this because hey, the need might be great enough to do that, but wanting to try to spread it as much as possible, and like you were saying, as far as the goal, trying to stabilize it when and where we can, trying to maximize retention. And then also to Ryan's, as he was discussing earlier, as far as these entities, should financial distress be the driver as far as like, hey, our goal is to try to mitigate loss of providers, not losing stock or minimizing loss of stock. So like we recognize as far as that not everyone's going to get as much as they need or want, but we want to try to get them something and have it be meaningful. And this is one of the other bullet points I had on the agenda. So should we be looking, I would suggest, as far as I think we would need to be capping awards at some kind of percentage of either like the insurance premium itself or some kind of like max, like headline dollar cap as far as not greater than X dollar. And I saw someone come off mute. Did someone have a question or do they want to add to that? Nope. Okay, maybe it was just my imagination. Kenton, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm still kind of formulating the question in my head, but we have a lot of really great resources in this meeting from the housing community, and I'm just wondering how much we actually know about the state of that insurance market and what those premiums cost. It might help us to understand how thinly these dollars could be spread or how effective a small amount of money would be in terms of assisting an eligible entity to afford insurance premiums. And then that would be part of that, as we've discussed, as we've heard so far, that there are maybe some of these entities are healthier overall than others, and that could be part of the eligibility process. But if you determine, for example, that a percentage of premium would be one of the ways in which you determine how much an entity gets. You base it on a percentage of the insurance premium. If an insurance premium for one entity is, $40,000 annually, and for another entity it's more or less than that, the percentage that you give those entities, it will matter more depending on the size of the entity and how healthy it is and how the other eligibility criteria weigh. But it'd also be just helpful to know, like, what kind of dollars are we talking about when it comes to helping pay premiums for eligible entities, whether they are a shelter provider or an affordable housing unit provider.
I think that's an excellent point. And frankly, as far as that is an area that I will have to demonstrate a little bit of ignorance around, as far as as I've done research on the topic, I understand that there can be some very large providers, like single entity providing hundreds or even thousands of units. But on the other end of the spectrum, that there are, kind of almost like mom and pop operations that they have like only a few units themselves, rather than, rent homes or multifamily properties as far as into the regular, kind of call it commercial market, that they've chosen to go the affordable housing route, either as a kind of a form of community service, or they were able to tap into certain lending institutions by designating it affordable housing. So I think we see a broad swath, and anything that we're looking to do as far as potentially restrict or cap any kind of assistance award, I think would be, we would have to know that as far as if like you were saying, if their premium annually is $10 million, a 6% cap will be a enormously larger dollar amount than if they have, like, as you gave an example, like $30,000 or $40,000. So I'm seeing hands shoot up all over the place. That's maybe a good or a bad sign. I don't know. I think, Kevin, I saw your hand first. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks. So, the governor has us focused on a goal of producing as many units as possible. And while there are some smaller affordable housing landlords, we should be focused on the folks that are still trying to do new development, because we cannot afford to lose their development capacity in our quest to deliver as many units as possible. And so I'm not knocking the smaller folks, but I really, really want to focus on particularly organizations that might be like the sole regional person doing this work. So I'm thinking like NeighborWorks Umpqua, right? They are the only person building affordable housing in Roseburg and in Coos Bay. Like, losing them would be tough, especially if we wanted to continue to build in those areas. So I just want to answer the governor's call as best we can and really focus in on those folks that are doing that kind of work.
All right, thanks. And then Ed, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
A couple of things that strike me, and Kevin made a good point on one thing, especially that one of the criteria for evaluating need would be what other options are available in a particular market area. So I think that's a good question. But the other thing that struck me is we talked about some that may be healthier financially than others. We need to be careful to focus on drivers that are outside the control of the people managing the facilities, and not necessarily reward those who have simply mismanaged their facilities. So let's make sure we reward competent people who have been affected more by things outside their control than by those who just have screwed up and need some help because of it. But those kind of criteria, along with what other resources are available in the community.
That's an excellent point. And then just to making sure I don't miss anything here in the chat, I saw Patricia added as far as for the group, and I'll just read out for anyone that's on the phone. So her question was, or her thought was, should we first consider what groups we'd like to target? So for instance, maybe nonprofits, for example. If there's a first come, first serve model, higher resource developments, shelters will likely access the dollars. And I think that's a good question as far as like, almost like, who's our target audience, if you will, for these funds? Should a nonprofit versus for-profit status enter into the equation? Should that be part of the consideration? Maybe it hasn't been asked, but I think it's valid. Should geographic location come into the mix? I mean, do we look at higher density population centers, or do we want to make sure that rural locations where they may have fewer access to resources are contemplated as far as maybe heavier? I think those are all good questions. And then Patricia added as far as are we focused on new development or preservation? And I think that's a really good question too. And I kind of want to circle back a little bit to something that Kevin had mentioned earlier, and I just kind of want to ask a little bit. So when you're talking about as far as making sure that like new builders are looked after or that are considered, is to make sure that we're adding capacity as best we can, what kind of needs would a builder have or a developer have that would differ from someone that has existing stock? And should that be contemplated? Because it's my understanding like a builder would have like more like a general builder's policy need, whereas someone who has operating affordable housing stock is going to have more like, it's going to be like needing to cover like property loss, and there will probably be elements of like liability in there as well. So not to put you on the spot, if you can give that some thought and maybe think about that a little bit, just for my benefit and for the group at large, because I see there kind of being some very distinct needs between what a builder would have and need and then someone who's operating and has existing stock and what their need might be. And then let's see here, a few other comments coming in. Yep, as far as that lenders, as far as looking at entirety of portfolio would come into play. And then Ryan mentioned as far as just around that rural locations having some funding set aside. And the comment as far as rural housing providers have small staff, whereas urban areas may have dedicated staff or more resources as far as to seek out grant opportunities and to fill out those applications. And one thought, and again, I know it's maybe not the most enticing of topics, but I do want to kind of move back to the application topic for just a minute. As we've had internal discussions here at DFR, one of the things we're trying to figure out is how do we get the information that we need in an application form? And the reason why I think that's going to be really important is that will kind of dictate a number of things. How do we establish, who receives an award? And we'll talk about this in the rulemaking. We'll establish, like, is it going to be on, as someone suggested, relative financial health of the entity? Should that be a consideration? For-profit versus nonprofit status, should that be a consideration? But within the application process itself, as far as we also need to make sure that as we're asking for some of these things to be verified. So if it's what is the financial health like? Well, what does that mean as far as, are we needing then financial statements from an entity? Are we needing, like banking information? Because I want to make sure that we don't have a ton of creep as far as this is all going to be necessary information depending upon what we determine is criteria to receive funds. But I also want to make sure that there's as level a playing field as possible for folks to at least try to access these funds. It's not a guarantee that they will get it necessarily, but that they can, have equal footing, equal access to at least be considered. And then also, kind of from an administrative standpoint, as far as we did have some additional staffing that was granted to us from this legislation, but it's relatively limited. And so we also have to be mindful as an agency as far as how much can we take on to vet, to make these determinations with our existing and only the limited resources we received to kind of help facilitate this. So one other piece I want to make sure that we get into the mix, and I also want to make sure we're doing all, I think we're doing all right on time, is, and sorry, I'm kind of a verbal thinker. So as I start to ask this, it may kind of be a mishmash, but hopefully I'll kind of hone in on this. So by and large, as far as we're trying to offset the growth of insurance costs, regardless of what the entity is, as far as for-profit, nonprofit, builder, existing stock, shelter, affordable housing. What gets really hard is to know how much has premium grown, as far as that, and that was one of that was spelled out pretty clearly in the bill as far as stabilizing premiums. So kind of along that line is we're going to need then some kind of empirical proof as far as that, they are buying insurance, wherever that may be from, how much it's costing. And then I would guess hazard that we would need to know kind of relatively how deep or thin is the coverage. And for folks who don't have an insurance background, and just give me like maybe 1 minute to give you kind of a background, just the measure of premium is not necessarily the measure of what insurance is costing someone who buys insurance. You can have a very deep, broad coverage, very low deductibles that has an extremely high premium rate. You can have similar offering, so similar entity, similar risk profile, whether it's a business decision on their part or it's an underwriting decision from an insurer that it's all they can get. They may have much thinner coverage. They may have lower covered costs that will be paid out in a claim. They may have significantly higher deductibles that they have to pay out of pocket before insurance kicks in. So we're going to need some kind of evidence to say candidate A has a very deep, rich policy. Candidate B has a very thin policy, because that's going to be a fairly big determinant of why is there such disparity in premiums. And in some of this, as far as I think most providers of affordable housing would want to have as much coverage as they can get affordably. I think that's probably just kind of a given. But either through age of the housing stock, or claims history, if they've had several claims filed or larger dollar claims filed, may not be able to get the coverage that they desire. They can only get what they can get, and that's the best they can do for what they can afford. So I don't know how to capture, or I'm open to suggestions on how do we try to suss this out in the application process, because I do think that this is going to be a pretty big factor on how we determine awards, both awardees and how much assistance they would receive. Because again, it's not always going to be readily transparent that folks who have thin coverage are doing that by choice. That may be all that they can attain, whereas an entity that has very deep coverage, very rich coverage, is that a sign that, hey, they're financially healthy, or they're really managing their risks, or they have a much newer housing stock? How do we make allowances for that, or how do we wait for something like that in eligibility criteria? We don't have to have the answer here and now, but I'd like folks to think about that. If there's something as far as that you have a good insight on how we can do that with relatively low administrative burden on applicants and us as the awarding agency, I would be all ears. And then, sorry, I'm going to switch to the chat here real quick because I see some activity here. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing things. So, all right. So I just I'll kind of read these off real quick, just because I do think we have some folks on the phone, so bear with me. So Ed had mentioned, as far as just wanting to know how can we get to an application information process where premium issues from projects that haven't yet been built? Are we forced to consider existing facilities by the nature of the bill itself? That's a good question. And then I saw that Cindy had a comment here. Is this a premium assistance program? Would the applicant need to apply every year, or would it be a multi-year award? Just to kind of answer that kind of in stride, as far as I think that's going to be a component of how we develop the rulemaking. Because of the limited financing, I think it'll be, as the financing window is open, or not the financing, as the funding window is open, I think it's available until it's expended. This was a one-time appropriation from general funds. There was no mention as far as it to be renewed in the future. And then the bill itself has a definitive sunset for this provision for the premium assistance program. It was December of 2028. So that does span multiple years. If I had to hazard a guess, though, because the need that's out there and it has been identified in this conversation, I don't think that funding would last over a multi-year time period, would be my guess. I could be wrong, or maybe there's slow uptake, in which case, that might be a consideration. But I'm fairly confident that the money would probably go in less than a year's time. And then I think we had some other comments here. Just bear with me while I scroll down. So Kevin mentioned, as far as we could look at entities hit hard by something like the ice storm, and what was that, 23, I think, 24, somewhere in that time frame. And then Ed also mentioned, as far as insurance availability and premium issues for multifamily housing are much worse for older facilities than newer projects that are being built under current building codes and not having a track record of prior claims. That is very, very true. And then let me just see if I'm caught up on the comments here. I think so. So I know that's a lot of ground to cover, a lot to kind of be thinking about. I would very much appreciate, as you and clearly are already giving some deep thought to these questions and to these issues. One piece I do want to kind of mention here, because we'll be pivoting on to a public comment period here in just a second. I recognize we're not going to solve this all right here today. This, like I said, was intended to be mostly a listening session to get some very knowledgeable and some very interested parties all together to kind of hear what each other have to say and to kind of play off our strengths and try to minimize our weaknesses. One thing I would like to share too is, beyond this RAC meeting, we have a second one scheduled for a date in September. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I think it's in the agenda. There will be also points to have folks submit written comments. I would urge you, as far as to provide written comments, even if you've shared today verbally. It was always worthwhile. I do my best to take notes, and we'll have the recording here. But as you give some thought to this, I highly encourage you to go ahead and submit those comments in writing. It gives me and other staff an opportunity to kind of sit together and really take that in, and just to really contemplate what's being shared here. So I'll take a moment to pause just to make sure I haven't missed anything in the chat. Did anyone else have any comments or anything they wanted to discuss in this segment here? I think we've hit almost everything. Again, just the last piece not to beat this drum too many times, but if you have thoughts around what an ideal application process would look like, we're trying to envision something that's electronic, if at all possible. That would help, I think, both applicants and then us administratively try to process those requests timely, and also something along that line would give us more structure so that we are seeing kind of like data coming in, so we can make comparative evaluations as far as in determining basically financial awards. So if you have thoughts around that, if you have any qualms around an electronic process to do something like that, it would also be good to know that and reasons why that might be challenging for folks. So I think that's a good spot here. Does anyone else have anything that they wanted to raise during this segment before we move to the public comment section? All right, I'm seeing no hands, no one coming off mute, and I don't see anything in the chat. So I think we'll go ahead and close then this section for the discussion around Senate Bill 829. And I will go ahead and open it up to public comment at this point. Was there anyone here that wanted to go on record and offer public comments on anything that's been discussed, or if anything wasn't discussed and you feel it ought to be, now would be a good time to share that information. And I see some stuff coming in over chat. So there was a question from Kenton as far as just in reviewing the bill, didn't see specifics as far as noting differences between new development and existing facilities. I just want to see if Ed can maybe help us understand how policies for existing facilities may include or exclude risks attributed to the development of additional structures being constructed on the same site. And then Kenton goes on to say, I would think that liability insurance for a builder would be borne by the builder unless developer is also the builder. And it looks like Ed may have responded to that here as far as the completely objective criteria may be difficult to define. Some subjective choices will have to be made in the process, and I'm glad I'm not the one not having to make them. I appreciate that, Ed. And then, Ed, I'm not sure if I went through that too quickly on Kenton's question. Did you have any thoughts you might be able to share with us around as far as the difference between a builder versus an existing provider?
There we go. I think in most cases, once the facility is operational and has its own coverage, when a builder is building it, the builder would have his own liability insurance, and I don't think those are really the availability problems. Those premiums and prices are going to be built into the builder's proposal for how much they're going to charge for building the project. It's the people who are actually operating the project once it's up and running and occupied that are the intended recipients, I think, of the funds available in this bill. If there's an existing facility that has a track record and is simply building additional capacity, that premium and coverage would be pretty much based on what their track record has been. If they have a good track record with their carrier, their policies will allow additional construction on the same site or even others without any major issues. The liability insurance is going to depend very much on the nature of the occupants of the facility. So, for example, something that's simply a affordable housing project that is, and I want to differentiate between the term homeless, which far too many people treat as a homogeneous population that are all the same, and people who simply need some financial assistance to be able to afford a place to live. So we've all seen affordable housing facilities function and run just fine. If you have mental health facilities, there's going to be a very different liability exposure than if it's simply an normal apartment occupancy. So those kinds of issues are going to be hard to address because they're not all the same.
Great, thanks, Ed. I appreciate that. And Kenton, go ahead.
Thanks. The reason I had put that in the chat was in the course of our conversation today, I've heard, and I saw a question in the chat that I was sort of trying to attempt to answer. And I might be obtuse and not fully understanding what people are saying here because, again, I don't have a lot of experience in this particular area. But as we talked about differences between existing facilities and things that may be in development, I guess I thought it might be useful to draw a distinction between what this means. Development, and as Ed points out, if there's a builder on a site who's building additional facilities for an entity, that's a construction, wrap policy that's different than the operational liability policy that the building's owner, whether that's a nonprofit or for-profit entity, that they're going to have insurance on that structure. There might be some, and Ed will know more about this than I do. I assume there's going to be some level of insurance taken out by the developer in case something happens to the building while it's under construction that's outside the builder's scope. So there might be some insurance crossover in that area, but I feel like what we're talking about, as Ed nicely pointed out, is providing an avenue for assisting and providing additional resources for entities for built structures to allow them to maintain property and liability coverage for those properties, once they're built, regardless of whether they're new, under development, or excuse me, whether they're brand new or been around for a while. But it might be different in terms of paying for, or be a consideration, I guess, for the group to determine if we're also talking about providing grants of some sort to facilities that are building additional structures on their sites. So anyway, I just want to throw, I don't know if I just made that even more confusing or less, but I think it's important for us to have a distinction between what development means, development of new structures, and what part of that is taken on by the builder or developer of those structures versus the ongoing insurance costs for operating shelters and affordable housing projects.
Yeah, let me respond to that. Kenton, I think you're right. And with due respect for Kevin's desire to meet the challenge the governor has given his organization to try to increase the amount of affordable housing that's available, 2.5 million would maybe help one project. So with the 2.5 million that we have to spend over the entire scope of this problem, my personal opinion, and I'm certainly willing to listen to others, is that the best thing we can do toward helping generate more is to prevent as many as possible from leaking out the back end.
Great. Thanks, Kenton, and thanks, Ed. And just out of curiosity, Kevin, if I think you're still on, as far as, could you give a little bit more background as far as, are you seeing or hearing from developers or builders, like, are they having difficulty securing coverage? Are they essentially saying we will not contemplate doing projects because the insurance component has become too expensive?
I wouldn't say that they wouldn't contemplate projects because the insurance is too expensive. I would say that the insurance is really affecting their older projects, and the state of the older portfolio is affecting their ability to secure financing to build new projects. So yes, Ed, I agree. We shouldn't let these projects leak out the back door. I think that by investing in those projects, you're going to help on the development end as well. They're tied together at this point. And so I agree that we should prioritize those projects, Ed. I do know that some of our members have just been dropped entirely. At least one of our members, and there's some overlap with Ryan Fisher. Home Forward is self-insuring on one of their projects. And one of our members, Central City Concern, they experienced a 500% increase in their premiums. And we've seen a steady uptick in that as well. OHCS has some really good data of like apples to apples comparisons from like 2021 and 2023 or 4, something like that. There's a 2-year snapshot of some data that OHCS put together to like sort of look at how the insurance industry is being affected right now. And so I think I don't have that information right in front of me, but we should definitely look at it for this group.
I think that would be very helpful to have that kind of information, and also just to help kind of provide just a broader context and kind of education, if you will, as far as around this. And so one of the things I guess I would ask too, is it been your experience, or as you're seeing, it sounds like there's a fairly select number of developers where they, if they have existing stock, but they're building, or trying to secure financing to do like new construction. Is it mostly because they're relying on kind of the cash flows from this existing stock to kind of like, hey, how they're kind of pitching these new projects to financiers as far as like, hey, cash flow is this, we're relatively profitable, not profitable. Is that kind of where it's coming into play? Is that how it's potentially influencing the addition of new stock?
Yeah, the lenders want to see a lot of liquidity if they have identified projects that are failing or on the watch list. So there's projects that are bleeding people right now, and that's affecting them. I mean, there's a whole presentation, and if you want, we can invite Bill Van Vliet to show you how he's a banker with the Network for Oregon Affordable Housing. He holds a lot of the mortgages for these properties. I think that he would do a much better job explaining of how that is directly tied together.
I think that would be an excellent resource. I think that would be really informative. Just seeing in response in the comments that there are several folks that agree that would be very useful information. If it's not too burdensome, if you could try to put something together like that, or invite this gentleman to help kind of educate this group and myself, especially as I'm working on the rulemaking, I think that would be very beneficial for all of us. All right, and let's see. Just saw another comment come in, so just for the folks on the phone from Kenton, as far as well, actually a couple comments came in. So Ed agrees as far as that this is exactly the type of information that would be very helpful. So Kevin, if you could provide that, would be great. And then from Kenton, also agrees with Ed that this kind of goes to the point he raised a little while ago. It would be helpful to have some additional context around the cost range of insurance for the eligible entities. And I do agree that would be very helpful for a wide range of pieces here, from determining eligibility. I think also determining kind of the scope as far as like where does the scope lie, as far as how do we, as I used the phrase earlier, get the most bang for the limited dollars that we have. But also wanted to make sure, and this was not included on the agenda, but I should have had it there. Another factor to take a look at too, and I do think this should be a consideration for how at least a portion of awards are granted, but a lens that all applications will be looked at is, how can this money also be leveraged to be used in underserved or disadvantaged communities? As far as that, we want to make sure that this is benefiting as many Oregonians as possible at all kind of levels. And maybe it seems redundant for me to bring it up. It's not lost to me that the need, and anyone who's in need of affordable housing or shelter services is probably going to fall into a category as far as disadvantaged or a need. And so, but I want to make sure that we're kind of keeping that top of mind, and that we're also thinking about that what the needs of an urban population versus the needs of a rural population, they're going to be different. And so thinking about how best to serve those needs as best we can. There was one other thing I was going to share here today, and I'm not recalling what it was. And my apologies as far as I had some handwritten notes on another agenda, and I think I left that in my office at home. So it goes to show sometimes old handwritten notes are not the best way to go when you're portable. One other piece I wanted to share here, and I think we're doing okay on time, is so at the conclusion of the RAC here today, I again invite folks very much to provide written comments. You can send those to myself and to copy, if you would, please, Karen Winkle, our rules coordinator. That just makes sure we have some redundancy in communication. The public comment window will be for written comments will be through September 8th. If you can get those to us by that time frame, I'll begin to start drafting out kind of an architecture, if you will, for draft rule language. Once the public comment window closes and we have a chance to digest that a little bit, we'll start to incorporate any of that feedback we get back from folks as best we can into potential draft rule language, and then begin to circulate that internally. I'll circulate that with my manager, Jesse, and then I'll circulate that with our partners at HCS as far as, and we'll probably also be consulting with them as we're working on draft language, just to see how best we can to try to tie in language and make it as tight as possible in the first round. But once we have that circulating, once we have that reviewed by exec staff here at DFR, when we get some kind of cross-pollination with HCS folks, it's my goal then to have a draft copy of those rules out to folks participating in the call today, so I can get your input. If we can find ways to, again, hone language, if we identify any areas of potential weakness that can be addressed. And then one other thing too, if folks, I'm not familiar with how familiar everyone here is with the RAC process, so it's probably worth mentioning here. I should have done this a little bit earlier. So with the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, it's kind of a multifaceted approach. One, it's to make sure we're getting input from folks that are interested and going to be impacted by rulemaking. It's an opportunity for myself and staff to gain additional insights and education on topics we may not be fully briefed on. And it's also a means for us to kind of scope, what is the need of rulemaking versus trying to do it in a vacuum. That said, as far as a RAC is advisory, we will do everything we can to try to incorporate the advice and recommendations folks are providing us. But I do have to kind of provide a station identification here. As far as one of the limitations, though, is that RAC recommendations or suggestions are not necessarily binding on the rulemaking itself. We want to try to take as many suggestions as possible, but just through a bunch of different reasons why we may not be able to implement or take every recommendation included in rulemaking. So I just want to make that just clear to folks here today. And also, as far as in that vein too, as far as if you have questions and you're not sure about something and you don't necessarily want to ask it in the environment here, please feel free to reach out to me. As far as I'm here as a resource to kind of facilitate this. I will be the point person in drafting rule language. So if there's information I can provide you, or if there's something that was kind of either in the materials or in the RAC meeting here today that was not clear and you'd like some further elaboration, when and where possible, I want to try to help facilitate that as best I can. Just seeing some stuff coming through in the comments here real quick. Want to make sure I'm addressing those. Yep, I'm happy to try to stay focused on the issues, and then yes, trying to avoid any form of labeling, especially in various communities. And then also, it looks like there's a request for can we get some more information on risk retention options that are represented here today? Ed, real quick, if I can just have you maybe elaborate on that just a little bit, as far as when you're talking about risk retention options, is that just who's providing coverage or limits? If you can just elaborate a little bit, that'd be helpful.
I just remember in the introductions, one of our members mentioned that she represents a couple of the different risk retention groups.
Yes, everyone, that is me, Karen Thiesing. I run 2 risk retention groups. One is HARP, and that has 83 public housing authorities. We provide a variety of products from general liability, property, E&O, et cetera. Then the next segment is AHARP, which is the affordable housing communities. And that is nonprofits, LLCs, which are tied though to a housing authority. And similarly, we have limits in property, general liability, et cetera. What we're seeing, and I can't give you an exact rate right now, but there's many factors that go into underwriting, and it is clearly dependent upon the experience of that home, that unit, that developer, et cetera, that goes into the overall rate. And we see right now the market is, and we have 400 members in AHARP. That's a sizable book of business that I go out to the reinsurance market and try to collect broad terms and coverages, new coverages, limits, and best pricing. And the markets are constricting. They are not looking favorably upon public housing environments. Lenders right now are requesting insane limits for obtaining funds. We're seeing upwards to 10 million plus in limits. We are seeing new coverages being demanded by Freddie Mac, sexual assault and molestation, as well as assault and battery. So there's many factors that are impacting the cost of insurance and providing those coverages out to our members. That's just a snippet of what we go through on a daily basis.
And Karen, I guess maybe just if I can give a little bit of a plug to your organization. So your organization also is it referred to also as Synchros? Is that correct?
Yes, that's a branding name, Brian. We started as HARP, the Housing Authority Risk Retention Pool, again, covering all those 4 states. That was in 87. In 2011, we created the secondary pool for affordable housing risk retention pool. And legally, everything is coming through HARP or AHARP. So when you go to our website, it does direct you to public housing or affordable housing.
Great, I appreciate that. And this is, again, just for folks' benefits here, as far as I've used some of the resources and I've spoken with some of the folks there with HARP and AHARP, as far as sometimes it's not always, you're not sure if you got to the right place. If you see Synchros, it's kind of synonymous with their organization. So if you were interested in learning a little bit more about how those risk retentions play out, their website does have a wealth of information. I know because I've used it. So appreciate what your organization does and how you share information.
Thank you, Brian. And you can always reach out to me too if anyone has any additional questions about the operation and how we underwrite and what we would be looking for in order to place any coverage.
Appreciate that. Thanks. And then also too, because I don't fully know everyone's background on insurance and some of the terms here, so it never hurts to kind of put it out there for everyone's benefit. So as we've been talking here today about like risks and loss and coverage, a term that's just was used in the last few minutes as far as risk retention is a little bit of a different animal. It kind of looks and feels like insurance, but it's definitely different as far as it's usually a pooled group of risks that have something in common. So in this instance, it would be affordable housing for Karen's entity. Anytime you have a risk retention pool or a risk retention group, it is a kind of a way to pool resources, if you will, as far as here are entities or areas of the market, whatever it may be, that has some kind of a similar risk profile. It kind of allows them to share those risks together, to pool those resources. And the reason why it is kind of a pool versus something else is oftentimes a risk retention group or a pool has identified a need that's not being served or is being underserved in traditional commercial insurance spaces. Traditional insurance may not be underwriting it, or if they are, it's really expensive. And so these types of entities have kind of been born out over time to say, hey, we need this coverage. Maybe it's not full broad coverage like something else may need. It may be more of a niche. And so that's kind of what a risk retention pool or group does. So I'm sure Karen can explain it even better than that, but I just want to make sure we're all same vocabulary and vernacular goes a long way. And I want to make sure that folks are just all on the same page and know what we're talking about here. Because I'm guilty of it. I throw around terms and acronyms like they're going out of style without fully contemplating, does everyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Karen. I know that risk retention groups are sometimes considered the enemy by the insurance agent marketplace and the general insurance marketplace. And there needs to be a lot better understanding of how well risk retention groups fill a gap that isn't being met. And some
Thank you.
actually work with agents as well.
Some do. We don't. I mean, if
Yeah.
there's a affordable housing entity that has an agent, that agent can have those conversations and help the dialogue. But once they are a part of our organization, the agent is no longer needed because our team handles all of those functions.
Great. Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And this has been a great dialogue here today. And I think I'm maybe for once in my professional life actually keeping to the posted agenda, which is fantastic. It makes me feel really good about myself. So thank you. So it looks like we have just about 5 minutes left here today. I know we've covered a lot of ground. And again, I really want to thank everyone's participation here today. It's very helpful to me. This will be very insightful and impactful on the rulemaking process going forward. So I just want to make sure we cover some next steps. This is also in the agenda here. So again, I'm going to plug that written comments to myself and copying Karen on or before September 8th. Even if it's just rehashing or putting down to paper what was spoken here today is enormously helpful. If folks are like me, sometimes how I think out loud versus think written can look and sound very different. So please feel free to send those comments to me. I welcome them. We have not sent out invitations as of yet for the second RAC meeting, but just to kind of give you a verbal, if you want to set some time aside on your schedules. Right now, we are scheduling for September 24th, which I believe is it's either a Thursday or a Friday, I believe, from 10:30 to noon. Again, September 24th, 10:30 to noon. I don't think we'll have too much need to change that date. One other thing I also wanted to put out as far as for written comments, I know I've kind of stressed it, but if you have thoughts around how we could do, what kind of data points should be collected from an application standpoint? How are we establishing who's affordable housing or a shelter, what their need is? And then I should have mentioned this a little bit earlier. The bill specifies that this is a reimbursement program. So entities will have to be purchasing insurance. They have to already have paid for it. This will be reimbursing them. And so they have to have coverage of some form coming from somewhere. So anything you have around thoughts about how we can establish and corroborate that coverage has been purchased, that it's in place and in force, that would be helpful. We have some thoughts here, but I would like to get folks kind of thinking on those terms as well. And I think that's everything I have here. Before we wrap up, was there any parting comments? Is there anything anyone wants to share for the good of the order? Seeing Karen dropped into the chat here as far as Singress's website. Excellent, and her contact information. Yeah, if you have questions around what that looks like or what risk retention groups and how that functions within affordable housing space, that is a very good resource. So looking around to make sure I didn't miss anything, seeing if there's hands raised or anything else in the chat. Everyone, thank you very much for your time. I know that you are all very busy. I deeply appreciate your commitment of time and resources to this. And again, at the end of the day, we're going to do our best to write rules that get these funds out to folks that need it in an efficient fashion with as little administrative burden as possible. When and where you have suggestions on how you think that can be best done, I would welcome those suggestions. So again, thank you very much for your time and for your participation. I deeply appreciate it. All right, with that,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.